The iMore Show is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, and online store. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com/iMore and enter offer code iMore at checkout. A better web starts with your website. It is June 19, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to talk about the Amazon phone, more stuff from WWDC, more stuff from iOS 8 and Yosemite, and we're going to talk about it with a phenomenal guest. This is the iMore Show. Hello. So joining me this week, Peter Cohen is on vacation. He's at some anime festival, likely cosplaying as a Godzilla. But in his place, we have the always awesome David Barnard of Contrast. How are you, David?
Good, good. A little more coffee to keep me juiced through the show.
So when last we met, we were at a phenomenal Mexican restaurant at WWDC.
Yes, we were. I forgot. That is the last time I saw you in person.
And that was great because I have no Mexican food in Montreal, and I would go to San Francisco and I would tweet out I forget the name of the Trapsueno or something, and you'd say that's not Mexican food. So you made it a point to actually show me what real Mexican food is, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It's good. That margarita wasn't amazing, but the food was good.
Yeah, well, we couldn't get drunk enough to not know the food was good. Which was
exactly.
So before we get into anything else, there's a couple things I wanted to. I know WWDC has been a few weeks ago, but I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it on the air. And I always like the way that you sort of put things into a great perspective because you're a developer who cares really deeply about the customer experience. And there was a big developer section, but there was also some stuff about the App Store, and the App Store has sort of been, one of your main focus. Well, of course, you're a developer, you sell stuff, but the App Store experience has been something that you've written and spoken extensively about. What did you think about the stuff that Tim Cook announced for the App Store?
How much time do we have?
As much time as you need.
It's interesting, and I was thinking about it driving home today, getting ready for this. I figured you'd ask me this question, and I feel like in some ways WWDC was the kind of high. It's Apple does all this great stuff. We're all excited, and then sometime mid to late week, we kind of start reading through the docs, and it's like, oh, well, it doesn't do this, and it doesn't do that, and there's this limitation, and there's this kind of, qualifying language about what Apple may or may not accept into the App Store. So, but I say that, and I don't want to take away from what Apple did, though, because I think it was Gruber who put it so well, that Apple took care of a lot of family business. Tim took care of family business, this WWDC. Syracuse, there you go. So, Apple did so much, and from the App Store to new APIs to extensibility to and even just their approach to this WWDC, opening the entire keynote with a hug to developers. I mean, it's like they very clearly wanted to change the tone. Feels like there's almost been a bit of hostility between developers and Apple over the last few years, and so, it's right out of the gate. It was Apple saying, "Hey, we want to change this relationship. We're all focused on building great experiences for customers. Let's work together instead of fighting each other." And it does feel like, over the last few years, there's just been so much, we've been wanting Apple to do, and so much of what was even in iOS 8, I think, was in the works for years. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know if you heard anything specific about this, but, from Apple people, but it seems like, iOS 7 was a bit of a sidetrack where a lot of what could have been in iOS 7 wasn't because of the visual refresh, and so iOS 8 is going to be so big because of that. So anyways, I'm kind of rambling now, but I'm excited. I'm excited, and still kind of have my feet on the ground, though, that it doesn't solve every problem, and they did things still in a very Apple way. It's like, we'll give you what you want, but we're going to give it to you the way we want to give it to you.
We're cutting the pizza here, Dave. You can have a slice, but we're cutting it.
Yeah, But I think what's so encouraging is that there's so many things that for years we've been asking of Apple, And so even if they gave it to us in the way they gave it to us, them, responding so directly to so many very specific developer requests was really encouraging. And so even I can him and Hob and look the gift horse in the mouth with saying they gave it to us in the way they wanted to, not the way we would have necessarily wanted it. It's really encouraging that they're moving this direction. And so there's definitely room for improvement. Everything's not sunshine and rainbows, but it was a really huge leap forward in so many different ways.
So there's a couple things I want to unpack with you. So one of the things that you said to me that's resonated the most over the years is just how hard it is to find the best app or the best app for you in the App Store. And the analogy you gave me a long time ago was, let's say you want a mileage tracker app, which you happen to make. You go to the App Store and maybe you get the free one, then you get the $1 one, then the $3 one. And none of them work well for you. Finally, you get the $5 one, but by then you've had to go through 4 apps. Maybe you quit before you got there. You've only made $5, even though the person has spent $8 or $9 to get there, and it's really in nobody's best interest. And one of the things they announced this year was editor's choice labels right in the App Store. I don't know how well those are going to resonate. I don't know how well they're going to be exposed, but do you think Apple making it known when an app is considered by them to be really good will be any help whatsoever?
Well, we don't know exactly how all of that's going to play out because from my testing of the iOS 8 App Store, they don't even have badges yet. But the editor's choice is 1 to 2 apps a week, and so there's only ever been like a few hundred editor's choice apps, and those are like my mileage log app is never going to get an editor's choice, but it was featured, and so I think the editor's choice badge is at least an indication that Apple is going to put their curation more front and center. So if that showed up in search, if there was a featured like this has been featured by Apple, not just the editor's choice. So there's a lot of little implementation details that kind of we've yet to see play out, and September or October, whenever iOS 8 comes out, probably September. It's still a couple months away, so there's probably still a lot in flux still, even with Apple. So it's really encouraging. I think there's still a lot I'd love to see them do.
Yeah, I think for many years the discussion was quantity of apps. Between Apple's App Store and Google's Play Store, we have 500,000 apps, we have 750,000 apps, we have 1 million apps. And when you get to like 1 million apps, to me the quantity is useless anymore. I would really like the discussion to focus on who has the best apps. I'd like to see Google and Apple and whoever else is in that space fight fiercely to say we have the best apps for you as a consumer.
Yeah, and so I will say I think one of and I wrote about this a week or two ago. The thing I'm actually most excited about in terms of the App Store specifically is the preview videos. And what I wrote about is that I'm hoping, and I'm often wrong, so I very well could be wrong about this, but I'm hoping that the video previews become a kind of tiered App Store. That when somebody goes looking for an app and they see the free app that doesn't have a video review, it's an indication that this app has not been updated in a while. It's an indication that the developer, maybe they're not proud of being able to show the app. Maybe they're not, savvy enough to actually do it. So there's kind of all these caveats for why a developer wouldn't put a video. And one of the biggest ones is actually that you have to update an app to put an app video in the App Store. Mm-hmm. And so there's tons of these apps that show up really high in search ranking and people find through Google and things like that, and the app hasn't been updated in 3 years. Yeah. And people are downloading these apps when there are better alternatives out there because it's hard to scroll down and look at when the last update was and whatnot. So what I'm hoping is that shoppers will start seeing those videos as a sign that the app is higher quality, and even just a video being there should at least say that the app has been updated, relatively recently, and then hopefully it can become a sign that it's at least an app that's cared about. And so, I would bet that we only see, in the low hundreds of thousands of app videos, because so much of the million plus apps that are in the App Store haven't been updated in years, or from developers who don't care, or developers that have 500 apps, and there's no way they're going to take the time to do a new video for each app. And then it'll probably even be pretty obvious the quality of videos if a lot of apps do get videos and then they're just terrible quality. So I'm hoping that will kind of segment the App Store, and that shoppers will go looking for apps with videos, and they'll actually watch the videos and make purchasing decisions based on that. And so, I think that could be a boon for for paid apps, because it gives the shopper a little more insight into the app and takes a little bit more of the risk away from spending the money. And then I'm hoping it would also be a boon for great free apps, because it's so easy to just hit the button and download and play with it. But it seems like it's even less friction to go ahead and watch a video of what the app is going to do versus downloading it, waiting for it to finish installing, launching it, signing in. There's a lot of friction even with a free app. And there's a statistic that I totally don't remember the numbers, but it was something like, only 1 in 5 apps ever gets launched more than the first time, and it's something like 2 out of 5 apps that get downloaded are never even launched. People just download the free app and forget they downloaded it because it takes a while to download. So anyways, yeah, I can go on and on, but I'm pretty bullish on the app preview videos. I of all the things Apple did, that and the analytics stuff are the 2 things I'm probably most excited about from a business standpoint, and again from a user experience standpoint. It's a terrible experience for shoppers to go to the App Store thinking, hey, I'd really like to track my mileage on my iPhone. That makes sense, and then they download all these crappy apps, and it's just a terrible experience going to the App Store now with the intent of getting a certain app.
So search got fixed. Well, I don't know if search got fixed, but a couple years ago, Apple bought Chomp, and they integrated Chomp results, and instead of a list view, you started getting the card view, and it was a horizontal scrolling card view, so only one result would really fit the screen instead of, I forget what it was, 6 or 7 in previous versions, so you had to scroll a lot to find things. Now it's a vertically scrolling list, so I don't know if that makes a big deal or not, but there's also an Explore tab that promises to at least give you some additional vectors of discovery.
Yeah, so I like the search not being card-based, because the list allowed you to get much deeper, much more quickly, and then swiping a card where each swipe was a new app, and so if you want to get to a 25th app, you got to swipe 25 times, and that was a terrible shopping experience. And I like how the list it shows the screenshot, and so right now I haven't tried beta 2, but beta 1 of iOS 8. It's still pretty rough, and so it's hard to tell exactly how great that experience is going to be.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be good. The thing with search, though, is that Apple has not changed the algorithms yet, and that's my biggest beef with search, is that I think they need to put a massive effort into better surfacing great apps. And there's so many ways, and I've talked about this for years, about all the different ways they can improve search, from giving better search ranking to apps that have been featured, giving better search ranking to apps that are used more or deleted less, or there's so many metrics that they could use.
Search. They can do search widening and nearest neighbor.
Yeah, and then they can do referrals. If an app has a bunch of people coming in from TechCrunch and iMore and review sites, that probably says something about the desirability of the app. And so I think there's all of these signals that Apple could be feeding the search algorithm that it appears that they're not. Search still seems very heavily weighted around all-time downloads from everything I can tell in following this.
So
So
you
it,
retweeted an article about using more social in search, and I've been thinking about that for a long time. I did an article a while ago about Facebook friend searches. I don't. What do you think about the privacy implications? Because obviously Apple knows every app that's on your phone. If we're
right.
friends in Contacts or friends in
Yeah.
Facebook or friends in Twitter, should it do some sort of anonymized stack ranking saying 80% of your friends have this app, so if you're searching for it, this is the one you might like, or does that sort of get in the privacy creepy area?
I don't know. I think Apple can do some of those things better and would execute on it much less creepily than Google and Facebook do. So I think those kind of things would be really cool. I think I think it makes sense to have more social. And somebody had talked about a while back, which I think is a great idea. Curated lists. Like I should be able to publish a list and say, hey, here are 10 of my favorite apps, or I should even be able to publish something. Here are all the apps that are on my iPhone. There are a lot of cool social ways that Apple could do curation, and these are the kind of things that maybe iOS 9. If you look at Beats and what they're doing, I hope that Apple, part of the reason to buy Beats and part of why they were bullish on Beats Music is the way they were doing, the curated songs, the suggestions, those kind of things. And so I hope we see more and more iteration along these lines. But again, I don't want to take anything away from what Apple is doing, because they're making some very big improvements that are going to have long-term positive ramifications on what apps get built, sustainability of development, and those sorts of things. So exciting times.
Maybe it's that. So you also, your company Contrast makes a suite of apps. They're not all this, like you have a weather app, you have a mileage tracker app, you have a super duper power user app. Apple's offering bundling now, where theoretically you could put a bundle of your apps together and sell them at a reduced price. You've also done promotions like App Santa, where you've gotten other developers together to do the classic sort of app bundling thing, that which they're not allowing. It's unclear to me, if related apps were bundled or if just by the developer. It's unclear to me how beneficial bundling will really be.
Yeah, bundling is one of those things we've been, a lot of developers have asked for a while, and Apple did it, and it's one of those kind of, they did it in a very Apple way, like, you can't, get developers together, you can't, all the limitations you just listed, but I still really like it, because I think, I mean, again, it's just one more step of Apple giving developers flexibility in how they run their business in the App Store, and that kind of is the fundamental issue. A lot of us have been talking about for years. Is the App Store is Apple's little walled garden, and so a lot of us are fully dependent on this little walled garden for our income. And so whatever Apple can do to give us more control, to give us more flexibility, to give us more insight, to just help us run a business is encouraging. And so yeah, maybe it's not like this perfect, amazing thing that's going to solve everybody's problems, but throw app bundling on top of everything else they're giving, and what they're doing is just opening up a lot of opportunity for us to experiment, to try new things, to run our business the way we want to run it. And I think I do think it's gonna be great for companies like Toca Boca, and that was the example they used. I mean, I have like 6 Toca Boca apps for my kids, and I'd love to hit a complete bundle button, in iOS 8 and just get the rest. So I think it's a great thing, and I think a lot of developers would be able to use it, directly, and then there's been some interesting talk about the possibility of using that for kind of discounted upgrades, and there kind of may even be some hacks that that we can get away with, and so the interesting thing about all this WWDC talk is that the one thing that was not mentioned at all that I'm aware of is app review. And so much of what can and can't be done with extensions, what can and can't be done with keyboards, what can and can't be done with bundles and App Store, this and that, is going to come down to what Apple will approve and what Apple's going to reject. And I've been talking to several other developers, and people have been tweeting about it, how there's probably going to be a lot of work done this summer on some really cool stuff that gets rejected. And that's one area I would love to see Apple find ways to offer more clarification. But even in that area that they were most silent on, there are some hints that we're headed a good direction. In that, not everybody, a lot of people were bitching and moaning about test flight, and how a beta app has to go through the review process, and how much that sucks, that I just want to get a beta out to people and it has to go through this review process. But in some ways, this may end up being a really great way to kind of test the waters. And I think Craig Hockenberry was the first to tweet about that, saying, don't think of test flight beta review as a wall between you and your beta testers. Think of it as a way to get Apple to take a look at your app. And so even in app review, there's some hints of hope that that there are ways that can become better. So hopefully people take advantage of that and don't spin their wheels all summer, but actually submit it as a beta and see what Apple says. So.
All right, well, I want to come back and talk to you about your app, but I'm going to take a quick break and just thank lynda.com for sponsoring the show. Lynda.com helps you learn and keep up to date with your software, pick up a brand new skill, explore new hobbies. They have easy-to-follow video tutorials. I'm using it right now because Jason Snell and Dave Wiskus keep making fun of me for using GarageBand to edit the podcast. They say I should absolutely be using Logic 10.
Should.
Yeah, David agrees with them. I opened it up. It was confusing to me, so I'm watching a bunch of videos so that hopefully it will make sense, and the podcast will sound so much better. There's over 2,400 courses taught by industry experts. There are more added all the time. All you have to do is think about, what would you like to learn? What kind of software, what kind of skill would you like to learn? Go to lynda.com. They'll have it for you there. I mentioned Logic Pro already. There's Final Cut Pro, Creative Cloud. Creative Cloud just offered a big discount on getting onto their software, so why not learn how to use it? There's iOS Essential Training, there's Keynote Essential Training, there's iPad for Business. The list just goes on and on. You can improve your skills, keep up with technology, learn new stuff. All the courses really highly produced, very well done. You can watch from your computer, your tablet, your phone. They're broken into bite-sized pieces, 15 minutes or 15 hours. You can learn at your own pace. You can download project files. It is the best way possible to learn online. And the best thing about this is that we've worked out a special deal with lynda.com to provide you with special access to the entire library free for 7 days. All you have to do is visit lynda.com/iMore, start your 7-day trial. That's lynda.com/iMore. I want to thank them for supporting us, and thank you for supporting them, because they support us. Circuitous. Whew. David,
Yes.
you had just around the time of WWDC, I think was it right after WWDC where Launch Center Pro 2.3 went live?
Yes, the week after WWDC.
That is a lot to have on your plate while you were in San Francisco, sir.
Yeah, we were busy.
I saw you and Justin both, and you had smiles painted on your face at least.
Yeah, Launch Center 2.3. We've really feel like we've really hit our stride with the app. We introduced some really cool new stuff with IFT integration being kind of the big killer feature for the release. The fun thing about Launch Center Pro is that we're not just building an app, like my mileage log app. It's like, you can track your mileage. And so, okay, cool, somebody uses it, to track their medical stuff and, saves money on their taxes because they're tracking medical. Or, my weather app, somebody uses it because they're a farmer. It's like, okay, cool, that's, they're using it in unique ways. But with Launch Center, it's like we're building this tool that you can come up with hundreds of thousands, millions of different ways to, chain apps together and actions and all this sorts of stuff. And so with IFT, Launch Center can now talk to web services and have web services talk to it. And so since the launch, it's been incredible to see what people are doing with it. Um, and so, I mean, it, it just opens up a whole new world of possibility. So it's been great. We've had great feedback on the launch. We added Giphy support to tweet and message GIFs, and
That was for Casey List,
iBeacon.
right? That's the Casey List feature.
Yeah, yeah, and we added iBeacon and GeoFence support, which that actually hasn't gotten a lot of press, and we probably need to do a better job of explaining and promoting it. But it's a really powerful thing to be able to drop an iBeacon in your office and then trigger specific actions on your device and now on web services with IFT as you come and go. So yeah, it's we're pretty excited about the release and have more great stuff in the works.
So for people who aren't familiar with it, Launch Center Pro lets you. I mean, your tagline was tremendous: launch actions, not apps. And some of the most essential cases you have is, for example, you had an action, just text my wife. And that's the stuff I think that got people initially hooked on, is that you could do in one step what would normally have taken you go to the home screen, go to an app, go to the part of the app you want to use, do a bunch of stuff. And that was sort of your initial claim to fame. But now with Ifit, you can create recipes with the beacon stuff. I don't want to call it Automator for iOS because that's a very different thing. But it is a way for you to make complicated but frequent tasks much easier to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to sum up the app.
So what are some of the things about geofencing that excites you?
It's one of those things that still feels kind of nerdy, but it seems as though a lot of the things that were nerdy a year ago are becoming more mainstream this year, and it's like the cycle is shortening from the really nerdy stuff being really nerdy to the really nerdy stuff being more mainstream. And so and there's still a lot of limitations with iOS. If we were working on Android, there's some crazy stuff we can do, but it's making your iPhone more contextually aware. And so, like when I walk, we hit an iBeacon in the coffee shop that we at the office frequent quite a bit. And so we talk to the owners of the coffee shop. And so when we walk into the coffee shop, we each have different actions set up. And my action launches Foursquare for me to check in. And then immediately we introduce this LC callback feature in the app where you can use multitasking to then launch a second app, even if it doesn't support X callback. And so as I'm walking into the coffee shop, I'm checking into Foursquare. It's launching the Square app. It's kind of doing all these things for me. And then we have iBeacons in the office. And so as I'm walking away from the office, it shoots up a prompt or a notification that if I tap it, takes me to a pre-filled message to my wife saying I'm on my way home. And the way we implemented those geofences is you can actually set days of the week and a time range. So I have that set Monday through Friday from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. So anytime I'm leaving the office between 4 and 7, that pops up. And one of the things I actually really like that I think hasn't quite sunk in with a lot of people is how Launch Center Pro adds a human element to the automation. So IFT is really handy for a lot of things, but when things just happen automatically, that's not quite as powerful as things pushing context for a human then to decide how to take action on it. So for example, like that simple example, I'm walking away from my office and the notification comes in about texting my wife. Well, I can tap it and tap one more time and I'm texting my wife and I'm done. So easy, so quick. Or if I know she's not at home and doesn't care what time I'm on my way or she's out of town or whatever, I see the notification and I ignore it. And so it's giving like this layer of context to what I decide to take action on or not take action on, but it lets me make that decision. So if every time I walked out of the office it automatically texted my wife, that's annoying. But walking out of the office and letting my iPhone, basically ask me whether I want to text her or not, it puts me in the middle of that. So another example of that is that and tying in with IFT is that we created a sample recipe where if you post a picture to Instagram, it'll actually send a push to your device. When you tap that notification on your device, it takes you to day one and automatically fills in a journal entry with the picture inline and the caption and the title already preset. So what's interesting about that is Day One is working on their online publishing stuff, and maybe someday they'll have their own IFT channel, so you could automatically push your Instagram photos to your journaling app. Okay, cool. It's this automatic thing. It just happens in the background. But what's really great about the way that's implemented with Launch Center Pro is that we put you in the middle of that. And so if Instagram pushes a photo to day one, you get to decide, one, whether you care enough to put it into day one, or you can just ignore it. But then once you get to day one, you might want to enter a little more detail that you wouldn't post on Instagram. And so like I created a little video to show off this feature. And, on Instagram, I may say something, funny, cute about my kids or whatever. But then if I'm actually like journaling, I might go into a little more detail and talk about how I felt, and how much fun it is to play with my kids in the morning before work. That's the example, I gave in the video. And so, I think there's going to be a lot of potential uses for this, and I think that the concept is something that not many people have kind of latched onto. So hopefully, if I've explained it a little better, how and let me be clear. I don't think we have the perfect implementation of it in Launch Center, and this is like the end of it. But I think this is the beginning of a really important type of interaction. And a lot of people have been talking about notifications and interactive notifications in iOS 8, and I think this kind of highlights what that can become. Is that kind of hybrid between automation and human interaction, to have your
curated automation.
Yeah, there you go. Curated automation. That's a great way to put it. I'm going to go trademark that. Thanks. So it's just really interesting to put a human in the middle of these automated things, to have your digital things contextually aware, but then kind of give you information and give you opportunities to take action without necessarily just doing everything on your behalf. And a great example of that too is Nest. Like, we got the Nest thermostat, and it is annoying as hell. I wish, and I don't think they have an IFT channel yet, but I would just love for Nest to say, hey, we think you're away. Would you like us to turn down the AC? No, because it keeps turning down the AC. It's hot in Texas, and so it turns off the AC randomly when we don't want it to turn off. We were hosting a party, and it just turned down the AC. So I think I think that's still kind of an underexplored aspect of human-computer interaction is curated automation. It's a great.
You want to launch the thermonuclear missile? No, please God, no.
There you go.
Yeah, one of the things that was really interesting, WWDC, the minute I said that we were going to be on the show, someone asked about extensibility, and you very properly said you hadn't had much time to look into it yet. But the idea of extensible right now, and you've explained this on previous shows, so I'll put a link to Iterate. I think was the last time you explained it to us. But you've done a lot of stuff with URL schemes and with X callback URL to be able to move things between apps. And for many years, many of us have been asking for some sort of inter-app communication framework. And Apple had ported XPC over, and they'd broken Springboard and Backboard, and in some ways they went further, in some ways they didn't go as far as I thought, but what they ended up creating was Extensibility, which is a very smart, very secure way to not only have apps, but to have separate secure containers for things like interactive notifications, for things like notification center widgets, for things like bits of UI that show up in other apps so that you can share filters or other sorts of procedural actions in other people's applications. And it seems like that's fundamentally changed both the definition of an app and what's possible for developers. So again, while I know it's really early, the two obvious questions is, do you feel Sherlocked a little bit because now everybody can do actions, or do you see this as a lot of potential for you to explore in the future?
Yeah, so I mean that's why I tweeted earlier that I with the launch of 2.3 right after WWDC, we have been more focused on the launch and bug fixes than we have been on iOS 8. So I do feel pretty far behind on digging into the possibilities, but we definitely don't feel Sherlocked because there's so much that we do that isn't, like IFT and other things that's about starting an action from Launch Center versus, like, most of what I do is going somewhere and taking an action that I wouldn't, like, I'm not jumping from an app to Launch Center to do something.
You're push, not pull.
Starting at Launch Center.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like it Sherlocks us. However, there's one massive limitation in extensibility that appears to be a philosophical design decision that will likely not change in iOS 8 and may not even change in iOS 9, and that's the fact that Apple does not give us programmatic access to launching specific extensions. So what that means is, one really great use case for extensibility would be the potential for any app that has a password field to put a little 1Password button next to the field and launch the 1Password extension. So the way I understand it is that you can't put a 1Password button next to a password field.
Which, you're not aware the extension is there.
We're not aware the extension is there. And even if we did put a 1Password button next to the password field, you would tap it and it would show you all extensions that had registered for whatever, I forget the technical term, but whatever, like, use case you specify. So basically with extensions, you say, hey, I have a photo, some text, or whatever, show me all the extensions that handle this, and it pops up in the little kind of open-in menu, and then anything that handles text is going to show up there, anything that handles a photo. And so from my understanding, it is possible for 1Password to register a unique type to say, like, the 1Password extension handles 1Password passwords, and so then I would say I want a 1Password password, and then 1Password is the only extension that can handle that type of data. So I think there's potential to kind of hack around it a little bit, but then it still opens up in that little open-in menu, and from what I understand, you also would not then be able to show and hide a 1Password button relative to whether the 1Password app is installed on the device. And so in some ways I understand these limitations. Like, Apple probably doesn't want developers to willy-nilly, like, Twitter block Facebook sharing and Facebook block Twitter sharing and these sorts of things. But it's a really odd limitation to not give any kind of control or awareness. Because, like, with URL schemes, we can run a method that says that looks for URL schemes, and so if we know the 1Password URL scheme, we can say, hey, is 1Password installed? And if the 1Password URL scheme has been registered by the system, then we know the 1Password app is on the device. And so that is a security, privacy potential issue. Like, some apps could in the background scan and see what other apps you have installed. But that's been an open thing for a long time, and with extensibility, there appears to be no way to do that, no way to say, hey, what extensions are there? So for Launch Center, that's going to make it really tough for us to do some of the really amazing things that we would be able to do otherwise with extensions.
Although I think we should remind people, like, this is Extensibility 1.0. I mean, Apple's just gotten to multitasking 2.0, so it is going to be a step-by-step thing.
Good point. So maybe that should be a hope for iOS 9, another year. It's kind of baby steps.
Well, they seem to be erring explicitly on the side of security. So, for example, 1Password could theoretically make a 1Password keyboard that would show up in any app, but Apple doesn't allow third-party keyboards to work on password fields. So anytime you develop a password field, it reverts back to the default keyboard, which makes that, again, sort of useless. So there seems to be a lot of stuff you can do, but if security at all rears its head, that gets locked down and put away from you.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I haven't dug in as deep as I should have at this point to these critical features that are going to impact the future of the app, because we're in the middle of launching. But it does seem like some of this stuff seems a little not like they could have opened it up a little more without putting huge risks to security in there. And so some of them seem to be more an interaction philosophy versus a security philosophy. Because, for example, the open-in menu is already relatively crowded, and to me has never been a particularly great user experience, because you say, open this PDF, and you have this giant side-scrolling list already. If you have PDF Expert and Goodreader and iBooks and Mail, and you have all these app Dropbox that have all registered to handle PDFs, and so it's already a bad experience in a lot of ways. And now with extensions, that little side-scrolling list is going to get incredibly crowded, and so it does seem like it would have. And again, I don't know the reasons they did it, and maybe there's some security things I'm not thinking about, but it seems like there was a lot of potential there to give developers a little more control, and even give users a little more control, to give some flexibility in the interaction, because now, like, if you're in editorial and there's a really cool extension that does whatever, handling text, well, when you're in editorial, you're going to see the same list organized the same way as when you're in Mail and you want to do something with text, or you're in another app. And so, even if it were
contextually aware.
Yeah, so even if it were, user customizable by app, and they could organize it differently for different apps, if they could show and hide different extensions depending on what app they're in, or if developers could programmatically put a button in the app, like editorial might want to put, some really cool action extension that's in another app, and make it an actual button in the UI to launch that extension, because it's so, fundamental, that a lot of people would want it. And so if they could check to see if the extension was installed, and then put a button in, that just that's kind of a different way for apps to work together, and kind of like it's like you could just add so many features to apps. Like, one person could build this text transform app, and then everybody else could just put a button in the app. And so I'm not sure exactly why they're philosophically opposed to that, but the way the APIs are written and the way, the language I've read so far, it seems that that's not something they've designed it to do, or even kind of the hints are from stuff I've read that it's not even something they want to do or even considering for the future. But we'll see. I mean, it seems like things are pretty open, and we're going to be filing radars, and we'll see. But from a 30,000 foot view, I'm very excited about extensions. I think it's going to enable some really cool stuff, and especially for average users. I mean, I think the week at WWDC, I tweeted when it finally dawned on me, and it should have dawned on me from the beginning, but extensibility is for my mom, not Viticci and me, and so I think some of those design decisions may have been from that perspective. And so,
well, I mean, they're also very slow. I mean, Apple's typical, and we've seen this, from everything from cut and paste to multitasking, which take to extensibility, which take years and years to get here. Is they put something out, and then they judge reaction. They see if they always seem to want to do the minimum possible, and then slowly grow it from there, if and when they have to, realizing that their idea might be different than what people want to do with it, and then they make changes. So it could just be another example of they put out extensibility. Now they're going to watch how it's used, and then mature it based on that.
But how many, I'm trying to think, and maybe you can think of better examples. How many things have they really matured over the years in relation to feedback? I can't come up with any of.
Well, I mean, like the feature, like initially, like there's no cut and paste because it's a brand new computer, and they don't know if you necessarily need cut and paste on a mobile device.
I think that was it was obvious from the first day I've got the very first iPhone in 2007 that it needed cut and paste. But you're in Safari and you wanted to copy a link and put it in Mail, and you couldn't do it. Like, that was an obvious omission, and they were working towards a design solution, and they finally got there. I don't think that was feedback from people saying we need copy and paste.
Well, I don't think it was feedback. I think what it was is that it's the same thing, like there was no arrow keys on the original Mac because they didn't want people porting over the console apps or the terminal apps. It was a brand new input device, and just going to cut and paste immediately is applying a previous generation solution to new generation product, and maybe a better solution would come up. And I think the multitasking was the same thing. Instead of just opening it up to constant multitasking, they started with a few APIs, and then they kept adding. They added more APIs, and then finally last year you got background refresh and selected multitasking for everything. And it wasn't like it wasn't the Mac solution. It was a very carefully grown solution for iOS.
Yeah, so we'll have to agree to disagree on the copy and paste because I think that was a very obvious omission from the very beginning. And I thought somebody from Apple even talked about at some point that it was because they had a hard time putting together an implementation that they felt was solid enough to work in every app, in every, it was a technical and design problem that they hammered away at for years. But I definitely agree that the backgrounding is a good example to them responding to feedback over the years. They have expanded the background stuff slowly and meticulously, and in a way that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the background APIs are really smart. So yeah, that's a great example. So maybe Extensibility will take the path of background multitasking.
I hope so. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean about the cut and paste. I mean, Greg Joswiak had that famous response where he said it's on the list. I just can't tell you how high up the list it was. But if you listen, I don't know if it's the next episode of Debug or the one after that, because we were spending the next 3 shows talking to Nitin Ganatra, who was one of the first people on the Project Purple team and was with iOS from iOS before 1 to iOS 5.1. And he explains things like why, yes, it took him a long time to engineer it, but it took him a while to figure out if they needed it or if they needed some other solution that would do something similar first. So it's if you're interested in the history of that kind of stuff, I recommend listening to those.
Yeah, no, I will. I've got those queued up.
So one of the other things, because this brought me to the subject of Sherlocking, and Guy English, my partner on Debug, was on the talk show this week talking about how Napkin got Sherlocked a little bit by markup. Reveal got Sherlock, which was a developer tool for exploring views. Marco Arment tweeted something interesting about in the latest version of iOS 8 beta, the podcast app and the iBooks app are now built-in apps. You don't have to go to the App Store to get them, and you can't delete them, just like you can't delete stocks or calendar or anything else. And people asked him if that was unfair competition, and his response is, well, if I can't make a better app than the built-in podcasting app, I probably shouldn't make a podcasting app. And things like Fantastical have kind of borne that out, where you can make I don't know if it was me or I was having a conversation with Jason Snell where we say like the reverse of Sherlocking is Moriartying, where you make a better app than Apple, sort of kick them off their own phone. But do you think there is opportunity even when Apple moves into something that seems like your space?
Yeah, there always is. I mean, it seems like Marco has been the canonical example of that with Instapaper, quote unquote, being Sherlocked by Safari Reading List. Now, podcasts. Apple creates the best default experience they can. Ellis Hamburger wrote a post on The Verge about how messages can't compete with Snapchat and Line and WhatsApp and all these other messaging apps, even though they're adding these new features that were clearly inspired by these third-party apps. And after reading his piece, I tweeted to him saying, I don't. Basically, the headline was kind of like Apple can't compete. And my response was, Apple's not trying to compete. Apple's goal is always to build the best default experience they can, and let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let developers boom.
Mario flowers.
Yeah, let developers do what developers do in extending the system. And so I don't know that Apple cares if people use the native podcast app or not. They just want to create a great default podcast app because they think podcasts are important. So in any of these categories, like the camera is a fantastic example. For the longest time, developers have been building their own camera apps, and now in iOS 8, Apple's giving us way more control over all aspects of the camera APIs. So that's basically Apple saying, go for it. Build a better camera app. We're going to give you the tools to build the best camera app you possibly can. So pretty much in any system app, there's tons of opportunity to extend and build better experiences for customers. The one caveat is that Apple does some private API type things that prevent us from fully competing. So for example, I make a timer app. Well, the system timer app can alert you even when the phone is silenced, which a lot of people consider to be a bug and is problematic, but a lot of people consider that to be a feature. And so I regularly get a feature request. The Apple Timer app alerts me even when my phone is silenced. Why can't your app do that? And the answer is Apple won't let my app do that. So there are some things that Apple can do at a system level that we're not allowed to compete with. But generally speaking, there's tons of room to compete in any of those. I mean, WhatsApp to the Messages app, Sparrow and Mailbox to the Mail app. I mean, the list goes on and on. So
there were a couple of chat room members who brought up some points. Good old MC said that the sharing on Android, the options are also really cumbersome. And I have a Nexus 5 here, and yeah, I mean, that's the problem. When you introduce new features, you introduce complexity, and it's always hard to balance that out. But hopefully it's evolving. And Guest 2014 is saying, what if App Store submissions could include keyword tagging for selectively extension permissions in the open-in function to give me more Apple-controlled security while giving developers solutions to help customers? And again, I think
that could be handled at a code level, not necessarily even at an App Store level. It wouldn't necessarily be keywords. It would, even as simple as like just looking for a bundle ID. So, right now with URL schemes, once we know a URL scheme, we can check whether that app is installed. Will it be even easier if we could just check bundle IDs? Is this bundle ID accessible on the device? And then that would tell us whether there are extensions are or not. And and that's the thing is I think. So, in iOS 6, I think, they gave us the Facebook share sheet, the Twitter share sheet. We've had email sheets. We've had messages sheets. And what's really cool about that is that developers have been able to integrate those deeply into their apps to put a tweet button in the app. And so where appropriate, they would put specific UI to accomplish specific things that a user might want to do. And so that same level of customizability by a developer would be awesome for these extensions, so that you could put a tweet button, a Facebook button, and a Pinterest button in the app. Right now, you can, because Twitter and Facebook are integrated at a system level, put a tweet and a post to Facebook button, but you can't put that Pinterest button when Pinterest puts an extension. And so that's, and again, I mean, I've already talked about this a ton, but that's just such a weird thing to me, how they built those other things in at a system level that we can access programmatically, and then they put this big wall in the way of accessing extensions in the same way. So
and Jason Hamill is also pointing out that with Android you can choose default apps, and with Apple, even with the extensibility stuff, you still can't make Chrome your default browser or Google Maps your default maps. And I think that's probably still just a purely political decision at this point.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one, because somebody, so today, people have been talking on Twitter about the all the new camera APIs, and so I tweeted about that, and Paul Haddad responded saying, well, until you can replace the system camera button in Control Center, or the swipe up from the lock screen to get to another camera app. But in some ways, I feel like there's hints that might be something they do at some point, because if you look at Control Center icons, they look a lot like Extensibility icons. And so I think there's some potential there that those 4 little Control Center buttons that I hardly ever use except for the flashlight, could eventually be shortcuts.
There's rumors they're working on that.
I hadn't heard those rumors. Yeah. That's nice.
Well, it's like you said, I mean, the background refresh push from iOS 6 showed up in iOS 7. There's stuff from iOS 7 that's just showing up now in iOS 8. There'll be stuff from iOS 8 that shows up in iOS 9.
Right.
You know how it is when you get close to shipping. You got to ship at some point.
Yeah, no, I know. You should see our list. People have been emailing feature requests for Launch Center, and it's like, yeah, that's on the list.
I'll tell you how high, but it's
quote.
Nilesh asked if the podcast app and iBooks app will stay as built-in apps when the beta goes to release in September, and there's just no way to know. Apple can change that every beta, and they can change that the last day of release if they want to.
What do you think that says? I haven't heard much commentary around that insofar as being able to update the apps, because it seemed like it was part of their policy decision to put iBooks in the App Store and podcasts in the App Store was so that they could iterate on those apps without having to wait for a point release of the OS to make changes. And famously, podcast got a major revamp way late, and then, like it's gone through like all of these like changes. Like, do you think Apple feels like they've kind of, both of those apps have hit their strides to a point where they can make them system native and they're not going to be updating and adding functionality? Or do you think they're going to provide some new mechanism for system apps to be upgraded independent of these release cycles?
See, I would love the latter. I don't think we'll see it, because I think I think we'd see more evidence for that if that was going to be the way it was. Initially, podcasts were just part of the music app, so they were on the system. They only did get updated when the entire system got updated. I think you're exactly right. I think that they iterated on them quickly outside the store when they had to. Putting podcasts onto the device will give better discovery for podcasts, which is nice. Putting iBooks on there, I think, is one of the new proposed emoji middle fingers to the whole Amazon Judge Cote trial thing.
Oh, that seems like a bigger strategic decision than just giving the middle finger to Amazon. I mean, because to the same point with podcasts, exposing people to iBooks is
Absolutely.
A long-term strategic initiative. That it's just part of the OS to have a book reader. So, yeah. But, yeah, the Amazon stuff is pretty funny, though.
All right, so we're going to talk about the Amazon phone. I'm just going to take one more break, tell you about one last sponsor, and that is Squarespace. It's an all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website, portfolio, and online store. For a free trial and 10% off, visit squarespace.com/iMore and enter offer code iMore at checkout. A better web starts with your website. I just actually had a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine, and this happens often, and if it sounds like I'm just telling you a story, it's because these stories happen to me repeatedly. Because I run a website, it is common that people will ask me how they can run their own website. And for this, it was a website that was going to be for an organization that wasn't large, but it was international, and they had a lot of specific requirements, and they'd gotten offers for people to build it for them using Drupal or using Expression Engine or using all sorts of CMSs with long-term maintenance contracts and thousands of dollars up front. And I had them tell me what they wanted, and I absolutely recommended Squarespace because you can go there, This person, I mean, if you do know CSS, if you do know HTML, you can code your own website. You can code your own JavaScript if you want to. This person did not, and they don't have to because Squarespace makes it simple. They make it easy. They've got beautifully designed templates. You can drag and drop content. If you have trouble, you don't have to call me for help. You can call their 24/7 support line. The plan started $8 a month. That is way less than thousands and thousands of dollars. And if you sign up for a full year, it includes a free domain name. It's responsive design, so it shows up great on your Mac, on your iPad, on your iPhone. It even has built-in e-commerce. So if you want to sell something, they're not going to have to buy a separate shopping cart system and integrate it. It's just all there. Best of all, you can start a trial with no credit card. You just go, you just build your website. If you decide you're happy with it, you go back to squarespace.com/iMore and you use offer code iMore. That gets you 10% off your order, and it lets them know that you heard about it from us, which is why they're supporting the show. And by doing that, by supporting them, you help support us. And I thank you for that. David, so Amazon phone. You and I were tweeting about it yesterday. Jeff Bezos did his best, I'm going to say this as kindly as I can, his best high school talent show impersonation of Steve Jobs. He came out. We always have a hard time covering Amazon because Apple events, they say, this is what we're going to show you. They show it to you, and they say, this is what we showed you. And there's very simple charts. They tell you everything they need to tell you. With Amazon, both the Kindle Fire tablet event and this one, we had no idea what screen resolutions were, which thing was on which device, what the front-facing cameras were absent the 3D. I mean, we have to wait until they put up a website later, basically, to cover them, which is appalling because it means we make up the message until they give it to us. But that's neither here nor there. They showed off the Fire phone. And I called it perplexing. I'm interested in your take. I called it perplexing because, to me, it's for people in the U.S. who are happy with AT&T and for whom Amazon Prime is one of the most important things that they do with their lives. And there's a lot of interesting technology, but a lot of not very high-end specs, a pretty high-end price, and it made little sense to me beyond that.
Your guess is as good as mine. I think that the two most interesting things I've seen in regard to the Amazon phone are Ben Thompson's post called Digital Whales, or talking about digital whales, or prime whales. I forget exactly how he said it. I skimmed the post. I didn't get a chance to read it as I was headed home to record the podcast. But it seems as though what he's talking about is how Amazon is building an ecosystem around heavy Prime users. So just like the free-to-play games make most of their profit on the whales that spend a ton of money.
The casino model.
Yeah, Amazon can make a disproportionate amount of profit off of heavy Prime users who rely on Amazon to ship their toilet paper and everything else in their life. And now with Amazon Fresh and so many other initiatives they're doing, it does kind of make sense that this phone is targeted potentially at expanding that funnel. So you have your average Amazon user that every once in a while buys something, hits Amazon at Christmas to get some gifts, and is just not a very heavy user. And then you have the Prime users who, are ordering things regularly, but not necessarily thinking of Amazon first anytime they want to purchase anything. And then you have those whales that, spend money like crazy on Amazon, and anytime they think to purchase anything, go to Amazon first. And so the Fire phone is maybe a strategy to encourage both Prime use and heavy usage of Amazon. They kind of almost one-click buy. You press a hardware button on a device to, figure out what something is.
There's a hardware Firefly button that lets you basically scan and buy stuff right from the phone.
Yeah. So I think that looking at it through that lens starts to make more sense, that what Amazon is doing is trying to build a bigger and bigger base of whales that turn to Amazon for anything they want to buy. And so the price is still perplexing to me, because if they're trying to get more people using Prime, and they give a year of Prime away for free. That's part of what we were talking about on Twitter.
It's an additional subsidy. It's like $100 off if you're a big Prime customer.
Right. So if the goal is to get more people using Prime so that you can get them spending more and more money until they become the whales that generate your profit, why not do what they've done with every other hardware piece that they create, and that is, don't take profit margin on the hardware and make it up on volume of purchases and media and everything else like that. And I think part of the answer might actually be that it was just so expensive to build this device that they wanted to build. And I haven't seen any reports yet, and we won't have teardowns until it ships in a month or whatever, unless somebody tore down a review phone that I haven't seen yet. But
you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, you probably won't get a second review phone if they do that. But we may find out, in the first teardown that there's some, it's some pretty expensive, crazy technology, and you got to think Amazon's investing a lot of money into this, and so you can take a hardware spec teardown and say, this phone cost, $199 between components and assembly and all that. Those teardown reports detail those things, and so maybe their profit margin is 50% when you're just solely looking at the hardware. But you got to think there's a pretty big team that Amazon has built up to be able to do all of the software things that they're doing and to be able to develop the hardware. And so if they know they're only going to sell 6 to 10 million of these a year to heavy Prime users, and they're not trying to compete with Android and iPhone directly, you got to amortize all that R&D and amortize all that software development over a much smaller potential sales. And so that may be part of their calculus, is like, if they made it less expensive, it would actually cost them more to because of all of the sunk costs in getting the device ready. So I don't know. I mean, it's perplexing. I mean, we can theorize for hours on every different aspect of this launch and why they did what they did.
Well, let me ask you this question, because this is the part that perplexes me. Why do you make a product? And we can go through the smartphones. Like BlackBerry, they just thought communication sucked. They wanted to be able to do email better on a phone, so they made the BlackBerry. Apple thought that all phones sucked, and they wanted to make a better phone. They wanted to make a phone that makes Steve Jobs happy, so they made the iPhone. Google was afraid of a world where Microsoft would dominate mobile media, and they would shut Google out. So Google made Android to sort of force a wedge into mobile that they could always occupy. Palm thought, there's functionality. We have a disagreement with how the iPhone was made. We think web technologies are better. And we also think there's functionality, like they had interactive notifications and elegant multitasking for years before anybody else. And they thought, these are features that are important that are being missed. And plus, we want a keyboard. So we're making what we think is a better phone. Jeff Bezos says he wanted to make a better phone here, and even if we say yes, it's expensive, but really, it's $100 cheaper than a 32 gig iPhone. Plus, you get $100 off Prime, so maybe it's not that expensive. But I don't see what problem it's solving for me. I see definitely what problem it's solving for Amazon, because it'll, like what you said, it will help me buy Amazon stuff. But the 3D stuff feels like a gimmick. Apple tried it to a much milder extent in iOS 7, and it created enough problems that they had to provide ways for people to turn it off in iOS 7.0.3 and iOS 7.1, because people got motion sick and vertigo and all sorts of things with it. The 3DS, likewise, people turned that thing to zero as fast as they could. So they've got 4 cameras with laser beams in them just to do something which I think, it's got the tilt navigation. I'm happy with gestures. I don't even like I hate the shake to undo on iOS. I think it's annoying. So I'm really... I said this before, like I bought a BlackBerry Z10 because I wanted to see what they'd done with the system. I am so conflicted about whether I want to own one of these phones, even if I could, because it's only available in the US. And that's sort of the last thing that makes no sense to me, because Amazon can't compete in China. There's already a giant online retailer there. They've done little to grow their online content. It actually says on the Amazon page that if you buy this phone and leave the US, you'll no longer be able to get video on this phone.
Wow.
Which is super annoying. So I just don't see who this phone is for, except exactly who you said, which is that person who is an Amazon Prime whale.
Well, and so that probably is the perfect explanation for the price point they put it at. They knew they couldn't compete with low-end Android because they're not offering a significant enough differentiation. So they're selling it to the whales. And so if you're going to sell, if you know you have limited market potential, and you are building it for your heavy users of Prime, charge them for it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it all kind of adds up to make a lot of sense. They knew, Bezos said he was trying to make a better phone, but it was, under his breath was for our whales.
And what's crazy is you can't access Google services on this, and that has been something that's crippled both Windows Phone and BlackBerry, because geeks like their Google services, and they're going to go to something that gives them a good Google experience.
Yeah, and so the Amazon phone is a very specific experience, and that's the thing. It doesn't appear as though Amazon is trying to compete with iPhone and Android. It seems like they're just building a great phone for people who love Amazon, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And with the price point that they're putting it at, and whatever deals they may have with AT&T to make it exclusive and whatnot, if they can build a cool hardware device that they love and that their heavy users love, and they can actually turn a small profit on it, or at least run it at break even. And again, because the break even is not how much it costs to produce the hardware. The break even is, as a business unit of Amazon, how much did it cost to develop and to run Mayday and to do all those kind of things. And so if they can run that at a break even, why not run that, build a device and run it at break even to encourage their heavy users. So I think it all points to that being the reason the price is what it is, and their strategy being what it is. They're not trying to compete with iOS and Android.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, and people thought that I was being hostile about it. I'm not being hostile. I'm being disappointed, because I loved it when iOS was introduced. I loved it when WebOS was introduced. I loved it when Android was introduced. I even loved it when BB10 was introduced, because there's very few companies that can put out a new sort of mobile phone anymore. Facebook is dithered. They abandoned their phone efforts. They went with Home. Now they've gone with Paper, and who knows what they're going to do in the future. So I'm kind of counting them out. Amazon is one of the few companies with the means to do this. I mean, maybe Oracle or IBM could, but they're not really consumer-facing companies. So this was like it, and I don't think...
Well, you have Samsung with Tizen, so I mean that's a really interesting, that's going to be interesting to watch over the next 5 years.
Maybe, but I kind of see what they can do with interface, and I mean, if I was them, I'd hire Pacific Helm immediately.
Yeah, seriously.
So I kind of feel like I know Samsung. Like Amazon could have at least surprised. I don't know. It reminds me, and this is the last question I'm going to ask you, because Gruber's been having fun with these apps that have been released lately, and a bunch of people have, like the Facebook Slingshot, and then yesterday this Yo app. And it seems like there's this new category of apps that are just absolutely. So I should explain what they are. Facebook Slingshot is like Snapchat, but if Dave slingshots me, in order for me to see what he sends me, I have to send him back a slingshot, which means that I don't even know what he sent me before I have to respond, and it sort of forces me to engage with him, but completely in the wrong time. And then Yo, all it does is text the message Yo to whoever my friends are, and they can text Yo back to me. And he said that these are the apps that come pre-installed in the phones that they give you in hell. But they're becoming. I mean, Yo got $1 million in funding, and Slingshot comes from Facebook. And I've joked that Facebook doesn't understand. That they may understand design, but they don't understand product. But these are major apps coming out, and it kind of hurts me as somebody who wants better apps.
Yeah, I don't understand. I think, messaging is just that kind of weird bubble, and it's kind of like, camera apps have been kind of a weird bubble once Instagram went for $1 billion, with WhatsApp going for $19 billion. There's a lot of money to experiment in these spaces, and or a lot of money thrown at people who care to experiment in these spaces. And so uh, yeah, it feels like a lot of wasted effort and whatnot. But in another way, I think that there's an aspect to it that we can all learn from certain aspects of what these apps get right and get wrong. And so maybe for all the effort and money thrown at them, we're all better for having learned what they did wrong. And for all the negativity around um, I downloaded it today and just started checking it out. Like, what's everybody talking about? And maybe there is kind of a core um, interaction there that's interesting. And I don't know, if they're going to be able to really actually build a product around it. And but maybe there's something there. So people have called it like the next poke. I mean, why did Facebook put the poke button? And people, I mean, billions of pokes later, and then they eventually removed it. But there's kind of like hints at interesting interactions in some of these, and even the Slingshot app. I mean, I haven't downloaded that and tried it, but maybe it's just another kind of interaction experiment that we can all learn from, even if that particular iteration got it so wrong.
I told you my theory, right? Like, my theory is this rage of mouth marketing, and it's the same theory I had with Flappy Birds. It's that people play it, they get incensed, but they can't help talking about it. And this is the same thing. Like, they download it, they can't believe how stupid it is. They talk about it. People say, "Oh, I've got to see this. If it's really that stupid, it's like America's Funniest Home Videos. I just got to see this." And then more and more people download it, and it becomes a big success.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely something to that.
But why don't they give Launch Center Pro $1 million? Like, if you're a venture capitalist and you're listening to this, give Launch Center Pro $1 million.
I don't want to take VC funding.
All right, well, just leave it in a pile near somewhere that Dave is standing.
Yeah, but I don't know, and I'm surprising myself here defending these apps, but I think that the aspect that is really interesting is that it's about human connection. And so for all the stupidity of the reason we're talking about it is in part because it's about connecting humans in a different way. And so for the goofy stupidity of it, and I wrote off Snapchat for a long time. Like, I didn't download, I didn't set up an account, and it was just like February of this year in 2014 that I first downloaded Snapchat and got a few friends, who were on there and played with it for a little bit. And, for all the negativity around Snapchat and that it's all just about sexting, like there's some interesting concepts that they're toying with, even if the UI is asinine and the execution leaves a lot to be desired and things like that. They're exploring interesting aspects of human connection, and that's part of why we're fascinated by it. And so again, for all the stupidity and for I would not be on the team that put $1 million into but I can look at it and learn from the things they touch. And Flappy Bird is another great example. I mean, I think you're right in some ways about the rage of mouth marketing, but in another sense, like for me, when I played Flappy Bird, there are some really great game mechanics in that game, and it's not just about pissing you off. there's a simplicity and a quickness to the game that makes it an amazing casual game. And so so there's just so much to learn from all these different things, as seemingly stupid and simple as they are.
No, I think that's a valid point, and I agree completely. I did a piece on community last Sunday about how, talking to you is my community. I don't talk to my neighbors. I talk to you on Twitter. I talk to you on podcasts. This is much, and that's the kind of community that didn't exist a decade ago.
Right.
So it's amazing how things have changed. A couple last bits of feedback. Paul Main was listening to the show as we were talking. He is from day one. Dave was mentioning his app earlier. He said, "You nailed the curated automation explanation. I've been thinking about the value of this concept for a while." So well done, Dave.
Well, that was you.
You together. We managed to. And so Guest 2014 is asking about whether we can have an iMore Live channel on the Apple TV, and unfortunately, Apple currently only does partnerships on the Apple TV, and they only do them with certain people, like major networks or services. Next year, sometime, if there's an Apple TV with an SDK, maybe we can explore that. But for now, it's not in the cards.
Well, there's been a lot of really fascinating talk about extensions, extensibility being how the Apple TV gains an SDK, and I happen to think that that's probably going to happen, and it's a really fascinating way to think about extending the mobile devices onto a bigger screen. So I think we haven't heard the last of the Apple TV this year. I think there might be some really cool stuff in the pipes. Actually, though, I did hear from somebody who probably has some stronger hints than the rest of us that might be more 2015 than fall 2014. But it's
I would wait for next year for more on that.
If all of the the interesting thing about following Apple, as long as you and I have, is that you start to see how there's this road that Apple marches down, and you can pick up little hints along the way if you pay attention that Apple is moving in a very specific direction. And so iOS 8 is leaving a lot of breadcrumbs for us to follow in the direction of some really cool stuff with the Apple TV and just other aspects of devices interacting together and games. And
I would love to see Metal on a 4K display.
Yeah. I mean, and I was talking about this actually with Guy English over a direct message on Twitter the other night, like at midnight or something. And he's obviously a million times smarter than I am and knows more about games and understands Metal far more deeply.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, small potatoes, but anyways, what I was saying is, I wonder at this point whether Apple will be able to pull off some things with hardware that nobody else could do. A lot of talk around WWDC was, and Tim Cook has been saying over and over again, only Apple can do this, only Apple can do that. And so, if Apple thinks they can sell 20, 40, 50 million Apple TVs over the next couple of years, they've got chip design in-house. They've got, they own the entire stack. It would be really fascinating to me, and the only barrier to this is margins, but they could do some really cool stuff with custom hardware in a custom chip in an Apple TV. So if they took
they could do some damage.
Yeah, if they took the A8 that we're going to see in the fall, likely, if they took that and threw some additional GPU cores into it, or did some interesting things to it that, again, only Apple can do with owning the whole stack and designing chips in-house the way they do, the Apple TV we see next year, presumably, could do some really incredible things that's going to be hard for anybody to compete with. And even if they don't, what's really fascinating, and Guy and Ben Thompson were talking about this on another podcast,
Electric Shadow.
Electric Shadow, is that Apple is iterating on an annual cycle with a lot of these devices, whereas the consoles are iterating in 6 and 7 years, these really long cycles. And so even if the Apple TV of 2015 using extensibility and custom game controllers and all the hints that we're seeing, even if it's not this crazy beefy machine, the A9, the A10, the A11, as they iterate on their chip design, they're going to be able to move much faster than these consoles have. And so paint me very bullish on the future of gaming on iOS and the interaction between mobile devices and big screens.
Absolutely. And as I keep reminding people, we've only seen iOS 8 Part 1. Apple always saves some things for the phone event, presumably this September, and they might be saving some things for the watch event, presumably this October. And they have not mentioned anything about extensibility or continuity when it comes to media content and games. Can you walk away from a game on your Mac and it'll instantly be on your iPhone? Or can you walk into a room in the movie you're playing? Right now you can AirPlay from a device your Apple TV, but Apple TV can't tell your device to pick up the content that you're watching. There's so much that only Apple can do
only
in
Apple.
that area that I am like you, incredibly bullish. David, if people want to read more of your smart things, they want to buy your excellent apps, where can they go?
So I mostly rant. I haven't been blogging much lately, which I really need to, but I've just been so busy with all these apps. So just follow me on Twitter, Dr. Barnard on Twitter, and then for my apps, go to contrast.co.
Perfect. And you can follow me at Rene Ritchie. You can go to iMore.com. You can find this show live, usually 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific Time on Thursday afternoons. If you can't catch it live, and live is the best way to catch it because you can do real-time Q&A with us like everyone did today. You can find it on iTunes. You can find it on RSS, both audio and video. Video, you can even watch it on your Apple TV and see how David and I are dressed today. That's the thing you're curious about. I want to once again thank Squarespace for sponsoring the show. Just go to squarespace.com/iMore. Use offer code iMore. You get 10% off your first order, and you help make the web a better place. David, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's fun chatting.
Absolutely.